Hello, I'm Miranda Kahn.
And I'm John Bachman. Coming up next here on Newsmax Now.
President Obama talks global warming during a speech to the graduating class of Coast Guard cadets. Is this really the right place for a politically divisive issue?
And for the first time in weeks, Hillary Clinton takes questions from reporters, but she can't shake questions about her email controversy. How she responded coming up. And Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal is trying to protect religious freedom in his state, but lawmakers there are not so excited about this idea.
Newsmax Now starts right now. And thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, we welcome you into another hour of Newsmax Now. We'll start with our first top story of the hour. The Chinese government now says it's strongly concerned about this case where 6 Chinese nationals have been accused now by the Justice Department in a scheme to steal wireless technology from a pair of American companies. The indictment says that they hatched the plot after 3 of them graduated from the University of Southern California and then wanted to use the technology to set up their own factory with these trade secrets in China.
And former NSA and CIA chief Michael Hayden warns China will likely retaliate for the charges. Speaking to Newsmax, he says stand by to be boarded. He also says Americans traveling to China or American companies doing business there should be cautious so as not to give the Chinese a pretext to retaliate against them.
And about 4 miles of California beach line are now cleaned up after an oil spill. A pipeline near Santa Barbara burst, sending 21,000 gallons of oil into a storm drain nearby, which emptied out into the ocean.
Our offshore personnel and the Clean Seas response vessels did not come across any affected wildlife during their operation.
But the company that owns the pipeline, Plains All American Pipeline, has apologized. No word yet on the exact cause of the break.
Work continues along railroad tracks outside the Louisiana capital of Baton Rouge after several tanker cars derailed. Officials called for local evacuations after the accident because 3 of those tankers were carrying dangerous chemicals. Those evacuation orders have now been lifted. Crews are working on removing all of the cars so that they can get in there and inspect those tracks.
Louisiana's Governor Bobby Jindal making moves to protect religious beliefs in his state. He issued an executive order stopping the state from denying or revoking tax exemptions, deductions, or licenses or employment against anyone who acts in accordance with the belief that marriage is between one man and one woman. He made the order hours after state lawmakers in Louisiana shelved a bill that would have basically done the same thing.
For the first time in weeks, Hillary Clinton takes questions from reporters. At a campaign stop yesterday in Iowa, Clinton talked about the State Department releasing emails from her time as Secretary of State.
I have said publicly, I'm repeating it here in front of all of you today, I want them out as soon as they can get out.
But will you demand it? Will you demand it?
Well, they're not mine. They belong to the State Department. So the State Department has to go through its process.
Federal judge shot down the State Department's plans to release those emails in January, saying they need to come out sooner.
The White House is stepping up pressure on the Senate for a vote connected to this key trade bill. President Obama is pushing for what's known as fast-track authority to eventually bring the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership deal to a vote. He wants the Senate to pass it this week, and so does Mitch McConnell. It's facing a much tougher vote in the House. He's also been in battle with Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who you see here on the screen. Liberals have called the trade deals job killers.
They're calling it the biggest recall in American history.
Takata has agreed to declare that their airbag inflators are defective.
And that decision affects airbags in nearly 34 million cars and trucks around the country, effectively doubling the number of vehicles already recalled. It's expected to take years now to replace all the defective devices. The problem is that they expand with too much force and can blow apart. The airbags are blamed for killing 6 people around the world.
And there's a new record in New York. So much for heroin being captured in this trial here. There's a new record of heroin captured in a bust in New York this week.
They have a potential to supply a dose of heroin for just about each and every New York City resident, man, woman, and child.
Over 150 pounds of heroin, $50 million worth, was seized in a raid near a park in the Bronx. 2 people were also arrested, and police found about $2 million in cash. The heroin had been smuggled into that state from Mexico.
Wow. And this is not the way you want to start a cruise. A Norwegian cruise line ship got stuck on a reef yesterday. just after leaving Bermuda on a cruise back to Boston. Boats and workers circled around the ship for a few hours trying to figure out how to free it. But overnight, Mother Nature did much of the work. High tide lifted the ship just enough so it could be pulled clear. The ship suffered some sort of steering problem causing the accident. It's being checked out right now.
Well, just a little while ago, we heard from the president who was speaking at the commencement ceremony for the United States Coast Guard Academy today. The president, as he said before, as other members of his administration have said, that climate change is a serious threat to national security and global security as well.
And it's something we've heard before. The president claims that climate change could cost the United States hundreds of billions of dollars. Also, it could damage military bases around the world. That's according to President Obama. Let's listen to part of that speech.
I know there's still some folks back in Washington who refuse to admit that climate change is real. And on a day like today, it's hard to get too worried about it. There are folks who will equivocate. They'll say, you know, I'm not a scientist. Well, I'm not either. But the best scientists in the world know that climate change is happening. Our analysts in the intelligence community know climate change is happening.
There you go. The president is speaking today, and he's talking about our, military operations around the world responding to climate change. We know there is a big issue right now in the Arctic Circle, Sweden and Russia. Russia is expanding. They're interested in global warming because that could create a new trade route for them, right, in the Arctic Circle. And President Obama trying to be proactive about this issue. The question is, though, considering this debate has been so hotly contested here in this, and there is a lot of science out there, a lot of science on both sides of the argument, you don't see any kind of consensus being reached, even though there is a preponderance of evidence.
Yeah, it's weird because a lot of people said for years, there was no questioning global warming, and now you're hearing other people do that. We were talking about with Alina Hernandez earlier, and talking about a story that was getting great traction on our website about some scientists that were changing their scientific data to prove that global warming does exist. That doesn't help the argument or the cynics out there.
Those stories can be found on Newsmax.com right now. Check them out. Global warming, always a highly contested issue.
Story.
We also want to talk about something else. We have our segment here called You and the Law, featuring Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz, a frequent guest on all our Newsmax TV shows here. But the question is, you're on a phone.
Right.
And you've often heard when you call a customer service line, this phone may be recorded. But as a public citizen, do you have the right to record a phone call? That's the subject of this You and the Law.
Let's say you're suspicious that your spouse is cheating on you. Do you have the right to tap their phone calls? Well, no matter how justified you may feel, the answer is going to be most likely no. Worse, if you do, you could be subject to significant civil and even criminal penalties. In 1986, Congress passed what's called the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. Now, that statute makes it illegal for a person to wiretap or use any other type of device to record the communications of other people without the prior approval of a court. Violators of the statute can go to jail for up to 5 years and be fined up to $250,000. And most states have enacted laws that mirror the federal statute, so one could be facing both state and criminal liability in the federal court. However, there are some exceptions to these laws. For example, it's legal under the federal statute to tape the phone call if one of the parties on the call has consented to the interception. So if you call your spouse, you can record that phone call. But many states require all parties on the call to consent before recording. Every state's different. So do yourself a favor and seek the advice of a good lawyer so he and she can guide you as to the law and the best way to legally achieve your goals and act accordingly. I'm Alan Dershowitz for Newsmax TV.
Good information to know in this day and age of selfies and where everybody's recording everything and putting it online.
Yep, I've worked in states where you have to have the two-party consent or all-party consent, one-party consent. As a journalist, it's a little bit more fun when you only need the one-party consent to get people on the phone, especially as investigative journalists. We got much more to come here. We'll be back with some other headlines making news around the world today. Plus, we'll have more comments about what's going on in Washington after this.